Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes found guilty of defrauding investors who poured hundreds of millions of dollars into her blood testing startup, but found not guilty of defrauding the patients who got bad test results. That verdict late yesterday from a jury in the heart of Silicon Valley. Our very own Scott Cohen is at the courthouse in San Jose. He has more on that story because he's been following it from the beginning. Scott.
Thanks, Becky. Yes, Elizabeth Holmes had promised to change the world. Now she is almost certainly going to prison. It took this jury about 7 days of deliberations, but finally, toward the end of the day yesterday, the 8 men and 4 women delivered the verdict. A stunning fall for a woman once hailed as the next Steve Jobs. Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud against Theranos investors, but not guilty of conspiracy and wire fraud against Theranos patients. And the jury could not reach a verdict on 3 additional charges of defrauding investors. Holmes, you'll remember, dropped out of Stanford at age 19 and eventually raised more than $900 million from investors by claiming that her company could perform a wide range of tests on a tiny sample of blood, and that she had deals with big pharmaceutical companies, defense contracts with the military, which the jury ruled yesterday was a pack of lies.
Holmes, what does this say about the dream that you had all those years ago?
Holmes showed no emotions in court as the verdicts were read, the jury not buying her testimony in 7 days on the witness stand that she never intended to defraud anyone. But the jury apparently did buy the argument from the defense that the talk about false test results going to patients, that was all anecdotal. There's no sentencing date that's been set yet. On the most serious charge, though, she could face 20 years in prison. Guys?
Hey, Scott, there's so many things to dig through with this. The message that was sent in terms of defrauding investors versus defrauding patients. I mean, personally, I always thought defrauding patients was the worst crime, but I guess it's a lot more difficult to prove that.
It was a lot more difficult to prove, particularly with the evidence that the prosecution had. We know that Theranos performed something like 8 million tests when it was finally up and running for consumers beginning around 2013. But there was no percentage of tests that were wrong. So we did, in fact, have anecdotes from a couple of patients who got false test results, one who got a false HIV positive, another who got a false indicator for prostate cancer. And they talked about what that did to them, the effect that it had on them, and the fact that they were false. But the prosecution was never really able to bring home the idea that this was systemic, even though there was a lot of testimony about big problems in Theranos' labs and the idea that Elizabeth Holmes knew full well about them.
In terms of the sentencing, you mentioned that it could be up to 20 years. It could be on 4 counts, though. Will they serve consecutively, or will they serve them at the same time, going all together? And that's got to be a huge question at this point, too, just how the judge determines this, what they come out and what they say.
Sure. I mean, he'll be guided somewhat by the federal sentencing guidelines. And if you break this down, there are 3 counts of wire fraud, which carry 20 years apiece, and 1 count of conspiracy, which is 5 years. So theoretically, she could do 65 years in prison, but she has no prior offenses. And so that will certainly bring things down. And the judge is more likely, we would think, to have her serve the time concurrently as opposed to consecutively. But there is also the fact that there was a substantial loss to investors. That's factored into the guidelines. And so it's pretty likely that, barring an appeal, which is almost certain, she will do some very serious prison time.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.